She was commended for her leadership.
Chief Wilson prioritized community involvement. This is something we all recognize as a strength of hers.
But ultimately fired for her management.
There's more to managing a police department than that aspect of it.
Vanessa Wilson is out as Aurora's police chief. The community has questions.
Now that she's been terminated, my question is the community going to be involved?
Tonight, we have answers.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight at 6 o'clock. I'm Shannon Ogden.
And I'm Jacqueline Allen. The writing's been on the wall for weeks. Aurora City officials confirmed what Denver 7 Investigates first reported. Vanessa Wilson is out as police chief.
We have a 360 in-depth look at what led to the decision and what's next. Now, Aurora City Manager Jim Twombly sent Wilson a termination letter today. The letter cites failures in overall leadership and management by Wilson.
Wilson will receive 12 months severance pay or until she finds a new job. And Division Chief Chris Jewell will temporarily oversee operations.
Well, today, Twombly said Wilson excelled as a leader, but running a police department, he says, takes a lot.
In terms of the many crises that we have experienced, I think she did very well in responding to those. I think obviously that was her strength, and she deserves accolades for that. But as I said, there's more to managing a police department than that aspect of it.
And we have team coverage tonight of this. Micah Smith has reaction from community activists on the decision. We're going to begin with Jennifer Kowaleski, reaction from Wilson herself. Jen?
Shannon, Chief Wilson is working with an attorney. That attorney pushed back on Wilson's firing today. She called it a campaign by conservative council members to smear Chief Wilson's reputation and credibility. Aurora City Manager says he's lost confidence in the chief's ability to lead. He stressed he was not swayed by council to fire the chief. At the center of all this is this massive records backlog we first reported on yesterday. More than 2,000 serious cases, crimes stuck in a queue, delaying investigations. The chief's attorney says Wilson asked for more resources to fix the problem. Wilson's attorney also told us yesterday city leaders knew about the records issue and didn't do anything about it.
She wasn't fired because of the records problem.
As the city manager, when were you aware of the records backlog and why wasn't something done sooner?
I became aware of the backlog in the transcription process on March 18th when I read the report.
So, Jennifer, let's take a closer look at this. The city is responding to this being a politically motivated decision.
Shannon, like any city, politics have been swirling around this for quite some time. Here's what we do know. Again and again, the city manager said he was not influenced by the city council for making this decision. But here's something that was interesting. He said that the chief was not fired because of this records issue. But then we heard Mayor Kaufman say that he thought the chief should have been fired because of that records issue. So there was definitely a lot of back and forth and a lot of politics because this is a major decision.
Absolutely. And so what's next? Where do we go from here?
That is a very important question, and here is what we know. They have to look for an interim chief. That's an obvious one. There were also questions if city manager Twombly could be targeted next. He reports to council, so they decide whether he keeps his job. Shannon, there is definitely more to come on this.
All right, thank you for this and for your terrific reporting throughout. Jennifer Kowaleski tonight. Jen?
Thank you, Jen. And it is important to note Aurora's police department has been at the center of large controversies over the past 20 years, leading to several changes in leadership. Let's give you some context here. We start in March 2005. Police Chief Ricky Bennett stepped down following his department's handling of the case of Brent Brents. He was a convicted child molester who later raped several women after a delay in getting an arrest warrant for him. Now, Dan Oates took over for Bennett. He led the department through the Aurora Theater shooting, but in 2013, his department accidentally destroyed DNA tests linked to rape investigations. He stepped down in 2014 to take a position in Miami Beach. So his replacement was Nick Metz, who was named chief in January 2015. Now, Metz was chief when Elijah McClain was killed, and when a police officer was found passed out drunk in a patrol car, that officer kept his job, was never charged. Chief Vanessa Wilson then took over for Metz after he retired in September of 2019. Wilson took on a lot to try to repair the relationship between police and the community. Some activists think Wilson's firing sends the wrong message about the community, to the community about that relationship. Denver 7's Micah Smith continues our 360 in-depth team coverage with reaction from several community activists. Micah.
Jacqueline, community activists I talked to today say just as they started to see a glimmer of hope for police-community relations in Aurora, city leaders decided to fire the person who was making the progress. Activists say Aurora has a long history of policing problems, and placing the blame on one person is unfair. In 2020, when Vanessa Wilson was named Aurora's first female police chief, she was tasked with building community trust and implementing police reforms.
She did an incredible job during a very difficult time in the city.
But Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman says she failed at other tasks.
I began to question her leadership as the crime rate rose, and I just didn't see the urgency of it.
Kaufman backed City Manager Jim Twombly's decision to fire Wilson this week. And many black community leaders like Angelia Baker say conservative city leaders are using Wilson as a scapegoat.
And a lot of that doesn't contribute to Chief Wilson. A lot of this happened before.
Baker says Wilson was the first police chief in the metro who not just said, but showed they cared about her community.
Chief Wilson had a presence in the community that we felt comfortable with, that her voice was being heard, that definitely that even if she didn't agree with us, she at least heard us. She showed her face in the community. I can't say the same about other city leaders.
Black Coloradans make up 16% of Aurora's population, but account for 47% of use of force cases. Many of those, like Elijah McClain and the Gillum family, brought national attention to the city of Aurora's police department.
This city needs healing.
NAACP Aurora branch president Omar Montgomery says Wilson started that healing process.
But firing Chief Wilson, I don't think it helped. I think if anything, it may increase that divide.
As the city prepares for its third police chief in 3 years, Montgomery and Baker say they plan to hold the city accountable for what happens next.
Now that she's been terminated, my question is the community going to be involved as part of the process of selecting our new chief?
We need to look at maybe recalling some of these folks. Maybe look at what our policies and preventative natures are for the city of Aurora.
Montgomery and Baker say they've heard from officers of color and LGBTQ officers who are afraid to speak out, but say Chief Wilson was a good leader, and they're very upset with the way her firing was handled. Jacqueline.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. And today, City Council member Allison Coons shared the concern of many community activists that this firing sends the wrong message.
The message that it sends is that it's time to stop our focus on reform, stop our focus on accountability, and change to a tough on crime posture. And it sends the message that those two things are mutually exclusive.
Democratic state lawmakers who represent Aurora issued a joint statement today in response to all this. The delegation says, quote, Chief Wilson has been working hard to build a police force that reflects the diversity of our community and hold officers accountable for racially biased actions. Her firing, it says, in the middle of these efforts sends a terrible message to the police force and to the community. And I know this is a lot of information to take in, but we've got you covered on thedenverchannel.com with an exhaustive article on just how we got to this point.
All right, a lot of us like to fantasize about what we would do if we won the lottery. Colorado lawmakers don't really have that problem. After a strong year for the economy, legislators are now considering how to spend an unprecedented budget. Denver 7's political reporter Megan Lopez tries to make sense of the dollars being spent.
If the Colorado legislature did nothing else this session, the one thing state lawmakers must do is pass a balanced budget. It is by far the most important bill to come out of this building each year, but arguably it's also one of the most boring bills. Here's a quick look at where some of that money is going and what it will mean for you.
On most days, the Senate floor doesn't have the smell of food overwhelming the chamber, but on budget day,
an historic budget.
State lawmakers grill burgers and one another about the specifics of spending. This year's state budget is historic, $36.4 billion. The Joint Budget Committee has been working all year on the legislation. Last week, the House debated it. This week, it's the Senate's turn to take on the long bill.
And the reason it's called the long bill is it's 600 pages of our budget. And we're going through line by line, about 1,000 lines.
One of the single biggest line items, education, $7.19 billion slated for K through 12, a nearly 12% increase increase from last year.
For the average family, they're going to see hundreds of dollars more in their child's classroom,
bringing spending to about $9,500 per student and bringing down the negative factor.
I would like to have completely reduced the budget stabilization factor, but the JBC's plan is to do that over the next 2 or 3 years.
Higher education will also see more money, which will help decrease tuition costs. Early childhood education, meanwhile, will see $8.19 million, or a 2,410% increase in spending. On the public safety front, state lawmakers are dedicating $565 million, or a 4.2% spending increase to fund some of their crime production priorities like safe street grants. Finally, healthcare will see $14.19 billion of the budget, an increase state lawmakers say is needed as federal funding winds down.
That means the state needs to be ready to take on some more of those costs.
On the Senate floor, state lawmakers worked to move around some of that money to fund their priorities, but overall Republican and Democratic JBC members say they're happy with the budget. They're concerned now with all this historic spending.
We're laying a lot of new work on our departments. I call it capacity. Do we actually have the workforce to do the work?
Because passing a historic budget is one thing, implementing it is a different challenge altogether. Megan Lopez, Denver 7.
This case of road rage didn't end on the road.
He kicks the door in, it flies open, hits my refrigerator.
After nearly a year with no arrest made, this man worries someone else could become a victim.
I just feel that there's no accountability once the person's, out in the wind.
It's still really windy out there. I'll let you know hour by hour when those conditions will calm down.